Hi, and welcome back to Gavin's Sonex B. Well, we're continuing on with the engine build today, and the next thing to do is to install the crankshaft into the crankcase. But before we do that, I'd just like to shout out, I think that's the term that you use nowadays when talking about things on the internet and social media, to Andy Gaunt, who contacted me recently. He lives in St Mary's, just outside Sydney in New South Wales, and he's just started building his Sonex B, and he started posting some videos of his build on YouTube as well, and it's quite interesting. He's already run into some issues and managed to solve them, and it's quite interesting watching. So if you get a chance, find him. I will have a look in a minute and find out what his YouTube channel is called. I can't remember off the top of my head, but he's starting from the beginning with a kit, and should make good, interesting viewing. Could do with more bee builders posting stuff on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, or well, nobody posts on TikTok today. Anyway, and YouTube. And the more the merrier. The more we can share all the information, the better it is. Anyway, back to the crankshaft. It looks a little bit like this at the moment. So I was very lucky, well, not lucky, I didn't want to do it. I bought my crankshaft pre-assembled, so it already had the hub, the two front bearings, the drive for the cam gear already installed on it, and it had been cleaned and prepped ready for me to put the conrods on, which of course I've done. And so what have we got to do next? Well, as you remember, we've put the shell bearings in for the camshaft, and we've put the location dowels in for the main bearings, and these are the rest of the main bearings, because two of them are already installed. The front two are installed on the crankshaft. That was done by Sonex, and then the other two, this is the third one back from the front, and this is the thrust bearing that goes at the back, have got to be installed. So it's just a question of pressing that, one of those, into there, and then the thrust bearing we've got to install on the back end of the crankshaft, and then drop the whole assembly into there, making sure of course that we get all the location holes in line with the dowels, and these stop all the bearings from rotating, or the outside of the bearing from rotating. Anyway, I shall pop the bearings on, and I'll be back in a minute. So I've just had a look on the internet, and this is Andy Gaunt's YouTube video site, and he is called it Sonex Wax Build, and it has a handle of Pendy7, and I see he's already got 55 subscribers, which is not bad, seeing as he only started it up about a month ago, I think. And he's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 videos on there at the moment. Anyway, I will sort out the bearings on the crankshaft. Back in a minute. So there's the rear thrust bearing, greased up and put onto the back end of the crankshaft. I've marked it with a marker pen on the top so that it tells me when the hole that I've got to line up with the pin is on the bottom, because obviously you can't see it. And I've done the same with the two front bearings as well. So the mark is at the top and the hole is underneath. I've also popped the bearing surface into the center position, and that's all greased up. So what I've got to do now is lift the crankshaft into position, which I can't hold the camera. Obviously making sure that this rod and this rod go down for the two pistons. We'll see how it goes. Back in a minute. So I've managed to lift the camshaft into place. I had to chock the casing up a bit more because obviously the con rods are poking out underneath, and got everything lined up and it's dropped in there quite nicely. So I turned it round until, I don't think you can see them, but there are two spots, two marks on the cam drive gear, and I've got it lined up ready to engage with the cam gear itself. And you put the mark on the cam gear between the two marks on the cam drive gear. Next thing I'm going to do is to drop the cam followers into their holes. They need to be lubricated first and then dropped in, and also going to lubricate the three cam bearing surfaces as well. So I'll get on and do that. So there we go, I've lubricated the three camshaft bearings, and I've popped the cam followers in their holes after lubricating them with lithium grease. And then on the top of the cam followers I've used the special cam shield grease, which is supplied with the camshaft itself, and this is to minimize the wear on first startup. So there we go, so that's ready to drop the camshaft into now. So I shall go and grab that and pop it in, and we'll see how it goes from there. So there we are, camshaft is in place. The timing markings are in place, so the spot on the cam gear is between the two spots on the cam drive gear on the crankshaft, and the camshaft is sitting in its position and all is good. So for tonight, it's now 9:20 at night. I'm going to call it quits because we've had a couple of very long days. As a lot of you know, we do bed and breakfast and holiday accommodation here, and we were up at 6 o'clock this morning preparing breakfast for guests, and got breakfast to do again tomorrow morning. So need some sleepy buys, definitely. So I'm going to just drink what's on the bench next to me, a nice glass of beer, and I'll see you again tomorrow to wrap up the other half of the crankshaft case and get the thing bolted together. Cheers. Well, a couple of days have passed, and the reason that a couple of days have passed was I looked at the manual and the video and realised that the next step I was going to need to put the flywheel on, and I don't have a suitable socket for the nut that goes in the centre of the flywheel. It's a 63mm nut, and that I don't have. No, what am I talking about? 63? I'm being stupid. It's a 36. Just ignore the 63. It's a 36. A 63 would be enormous, be like that. Anyway, a 36mm socket. And so I went out and tried to buy one, but no shops around here go up to 36. 32 is the biggest. And then on the way back from the shops, I had an idea, and I thought, I wonder if my mate Larry has a 36mm socket. So I rang him up, and yes, he does. Not because he has a large set of or a set of large sockets, but just by chance he had to buy one because it fits something on his camper van, and so he had the socket and a suitable torque wrench to fit it as well. So I've got both. And so what I've done is, a few days later than anticipated, is I have actually put the flywheel on. Now, the reason you have to put the flywheel on, I'll just turn the camera around. And there it is, and there's the nut in the centre, which has a washer underneath it. The reason you have to do it is you need to set the end float on the thrust bearing. Now, you can probably just see that there is a quite substantial gap between the back of the flywheel and the thrust bearing, and the kit comes with a set of shims, and the object of the exercise is to measure that gap with the crankshaft pulled back as far as possible to make the gap as big as possible, and the flywheel tightened up so that it's not fully tight but seated nicely on the end of the crankshaft. And then you have to measure with your feeler gauges the gap, and when I measured mine, it's 66 thousandths of an inch. And the object of the exercise is to shim it so that you have between 3 and 6 thousandths of an inch gap left. So I got the shims out and have come up with a combination of shims which gives me 62 thou, and which leaves me with 4 thousandths of an inch end play. And the shims look a little bit like that. In fact, those are the 5 shims that are required to bring the gap down to 4 thousandths of an inch. So now I've worked that out. You can't do that once the other half of the crankcase is installed, for obvious reasons. So you have to do that now before the two halves are put together. So now we've got the little pile of shims over there, we can take the flywheel off again and continue with assembling the two halves of the crankcase together. So I'll busy away, get that off. To get it off, I'm going to use a puller which is over there, because it's quite tight on the end of the crank shaft, and I'll let you know what happens. More later. So there we are. The flywheel is off, and we're ready to get the two halves mated together. So in preparation for that, I have lithium greased the one main bearing half on this side, lithium greased the three camshaft bearing halves, and put the cam followers in with some lithium grease, and then put the special cam molybdenum moly grease on the top of each of the cam followers. The only thing left to do is to use our former gasket and basically run some right the way round the outside of this half, and then drop it down on top of this half, remembering that we need to fit the little plug in the end of the camshaft, which needs some former gasket compound around it to seal it as well. So that's what I'm going to do now. I have the nitrile glove on because apparently the former gasket stuff is very sticky and goes everywhere, and you need to smooth it out with your finger as you go. So I've never used this kind of gasket sealer before, so I'll let you know in a few minutes whether it was easy or difficult. Wish me luck. So there we are. It took a bit longer than I anticipated, but it is done. The two halves are together. The former gasket, number 3, is very sticky and gets everywhere, and I'm going to have to go and wash my hands because I've got a thin coating of it all over me. So the 6 main nuts that hold the two halves together are done up and torqued to the torque settings in the manual, and then there are a further 10 studs which need nuts and washers on to and they're torqued up. 3 additional bolts which go right the way through. There's one there on the corner. They're in and torqued up as well, and then there are 2 that go around the camshaft, and they're on and torqued up as well. Just wiped off any little bit of excess of the gasket sealer that's squeezed out. A tiny little bit is squeezed out all the way round, and I mean a tiny little bit. It's a very, very small amount. And just wipe that off, and I'm going to put the engine up the right way now so that it's not on its side, and then we can start looking at what comes next. But for this video, I think that's probably enough. We've got it so that it's in one lump, the crankcase that is. We've got the crankshaft in, the camshaft in, and it all looks good at the moment. Did have a small issue putting it together because when I was messing around with it just prior to putting the two halves together, I managed to lift the crankshaft out of its bearings that it was sitting in, and one of the bearings rotated slightly and didn't go back into its little pin. If you remember, each of them have got a pin to stop them from rotating and to locate them. And when I tried to put the two halves together, they would not seat down, so I had to pull it apart again, find out which bearing it was that wasn't quite seated, reseat it, and then popped it back together, and everything's fine, and it rotates freely, even though it's been torqued right up now. So obviously everything's in line, and all is good to carry on. So I'll leave it at that for today, and I'll speak to you again in a couple of days when I've made some more progress. Bye for now.